we go. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So first of all, it is lovely to meet you. And if you could say your name and where you are, please.
My name is Jeremy Timm, and I am broadcasting from Johannesburg, South Africa.
Wonderful. And the first question for you is, who are you as a human being? And that can be any aspect of yourself you would like to share, your values, your passions, qualities about yourself.
Hmm. I would say I'm a bridge builder. I I think from an early age have been driven by putting things together. Uh, I want to I want the world to be a better place. Um, and I've always sought to create holes, which is why I like Gestalt so much. So I like to bridge between. And in some ways, that's made me sit in between. So I often find myself on the boundary or sort of outside looking in. And I think for a long time in my life, I yearned to be in. And then I realized that the outside was actually the in for me. So I've grown to be comfortable on the boundary. Um, my history matters to who I am. And I trace my lineage through my sort of biological ancestry. I'm the, and I trace my lineage to really the start of when my ancestors arrived in the Eastern Cape of the African continent, of South Africa. And they came as part of a social experiment, I suppose, which was called the 1820 settlers, groups of people from England who were promised a lot in South Africa. And I think they got a lot, they took a lot, but they didn't get what they expected, which was to be a human buffer on the eastern coast of Southern Africa, between the expansion on the one hand of Europeans going east, and they met the Xhosa who were in the eastern part of the country and progressing west. And the British wanted a sort of human buffer between them. So this land was given after war to the 1820 settlers. And that has kind of created a dynamic of being on the border between.
There's
And
the in
my family
between right there from the very beginning.
yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that I come from, on my mother's side, missionaries who were Christian Wesleyan Methodists, and teachers. And on my father's side, more farmers. And with that, a zeal to change people. And I have an ambivalence about parts of my heritage around, well, since when did you become suddenly the expert to tell others what to do? So I'm very sensitive to my lineage and where I'm from, and I have deep respect and love for aspects of it, and I also hold some of it with ambivalence. And yeah, I'm also I'm very much for social justice. Part of my family has also been very active and concerned in the time of apartheid South Africa, against apartheid. And we always aligned ourselves with the progressive forces of the country. And I think since democracy, a lot of things have come up to invite me to explore myself fully. So what does it mean to be a white, middle-aged, Anglo-African man.
A
So
lot.
these
That's a
questions,
loaded identity.
a lot. So I'm really yeah, I'm drawn to those sorts of questions.
Mhm.
With the real desire to become a fuller, more grounded human being. And obviously that's called, to me, that's a life. It's a lot and it's a life.
Mhm.
It's what I do, and I like to think that it's a journey towards authenticity, because when I can hold and own all of my stuff, it allows the people I work with and the people I love to do the same.
Okay. So, in terms of other human beings, I am
Hmm.
curious who has impacted or significantly touched or shaped in some way who you are relationally.
Some of them are family members, and some are heroes, and some are both. So some of my family members are heroes to me, and some of I mean, I grew up at a time where we had great heroes in South Africa. So I think of the group that were jailed for so long, Nelson Mandela. I think of Walter Sisulu and Albertine Sisulu, the O.R. Tambo. I think of that group, Ahmed Kathrada. They were all a group of incredible, heroic leaders that kind of put down the foundation for our human constitution that we have as a country. I think of Desmond Tutu as well, who was an amazing, amazing man who made Christianity religion to be inspired by. So I loved him. And I think, if I think of my family, my paternal grandmother was very feisty, and I loved her feistiness, and she was sort of passionate, loyal, and conflicted. She was a real full human being, and she was deeply loving, fiercely loving of her family, and particularly her grandchildren. And so she was very important in a sort of sense of identity and rootedness. I would say that a place on my mother's side, which holds us all together, is a small village in the Eastern Cape, where my family kind of has a sort of spiritual home, I would say, or a big identity. And I think of my mother's family as being incredibly socially concerned and non-material. They didn't measure themselves in material wealth. They were preachers and teachers, and they were passionate about people. So I have huge respect for that. I mean, I don't like materialism, and I don't like fakeness. And they were authentic, brave. I think they were very human. At times they despaired, but they were relentless in their vision for at their time, and with their kind of mediums and frames for bringing improvement to particularly people who'd been unjustly treated by whatever system. So yeah, I'd say combination of family members, heroes. I'd also say I have, as a child, the presence of African women in my life. It's a very South African thing. My mother worked as a teacher, and we were looked after by what we used to call our nanny, an amazing matriarch. And we were also had another matriarch in my family's home in the Eastern Cape, and this sort of very iconic, strong, Xhosa African woman who played a big role in my early childhood of nurturing and anchoring me. So I really, I feel very grateful for that.
It's interesting. I'm hearing you using, words like brave and fierce, and just you talk about sort of being anchored or orienting in social justice and things like that. I'm really curious, do you remember what might have been the first time you said, this is not fair, as like that whole felt experience of some kind of injustice?
I have quite a few memories. Well, I mean, in my early childhood, I remember we used to have a gentleman who used to work 1 or 2 days a week for us, or once a week in our garden. He was a gardener. And at that time, if you were a Black South African in Cape Town, where I grew up, you had to have a permit to live in the city. And if you didn't have a permit, you were banished to what were called, ironically, homelands, reserves, essentially. And this gentleman didn't have a permit. So I remember my mom offering him a place to stay with us at great risk to her, to us, because it was, you'd get arrested if you did that. And I remember my mother sort of explaining this to us as kids. I remember my one uncle, when we went up for a holiday to Johannesburg, and we were driving back from somewhere, and there were these two sort of burly white guys fighting with a black hawker who was selling oranges. And I remember my uncle stopping the car, and my uncle's he's quite a tall man, but he's not by no means a brute. He's a sort of deeply caring, thinking, spiritual man, and he intervened against these big, tough guys. And I remember those sorts of moments where we just said, no, this is not, we will not, we will not tolerate this. We'll stand up against it. And growing up as a school, at school age, it was a time when there was lots of conflict. So we would hear about it all the time, see it. I remember our domestic worker's daughter would come and spent the year with me. I didn't go to creche for some complex reasons, but for that year, and she came every day because their schools were closed where she was going to school because of sort of uprisings, I suppose, and they closed the school. So she came, and it was always like, why? It was always curious why. So I want to know why. I was delighted to have a friend, but why was she coming? So there, and we were told about this. So I remember I was drenched in that sort of the context of South Africa. My mother tells stories before I remember of incidents which me and my brother were part of, but I don't remember those.
So in terms of, those or other events or a set of circumstances that really define or change you, does anything else come to mind, like an event or a set of circumstances? I mean, it's obviously not simple cause and effect, how we come to be who we are, but just curious what pops up for you from any point of your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my stuff has been around sort of peeling back some of the projections onto others for needs that I had.
Hmm.
So I used to look with such envy. I mean, it sounds crazy and somewhat trite and perhaps disrespectful in some ways to say it now. But I remember growing up in the white suburbs of Cape Town, and we'd formed what we called the social interaction group, which was we formed a group of us that formed a connection, a bridge with, and our schools were segregated at that time. So we were in a white school. We formed a relationship with a black school, and we would create social events. I mean, even that was, it was frowned upon. It got, the police came to investigate. There was, oh, what are you guys doing? Why are you doing this? What on earth's going on? And it caused a lot of trouble for our school and our principal and teachers. But I remember going into the townships, which was where Black South Africans were forced to live, and wishing I was there. It was a different dynamic. It felt far more inclusive, far more sort of rich and dynamic and vibrant. And I used to sort of wish that I was Black and not white. And I mean, there was a whole lot of reasons I think I was projecting onto sort of Black communities I wanted to be part of. And I think I was grappling with my own things about how do I be part of my own system and own culture. Because, at that time, my parents were splitting up. It was, they were going through divorce, different families being formed. And I was looking for the place, I think, where
sort of that
was
escapist, magical thinking.
Yeah, not even escapist, but what I experienced, I think, in those communities was an unconditional acceptance and welcoming, and a specialness, because it was unusual to do this. So we kind of got a little bit of a celebrity status. I think I felt really affirmed in those roles. So a lot of my stuff has been, and I think, in that projection, I created all kinds of for me and everybody else around me. So I think a lot of mine is to become comfortable and honest about who I am and what I look like and what I represent, which is part of me, but I'm much more than that. But to get comfortable in my skin. So I think that's been a big thing for me, is like coming back to maybe what was driving those sort of needs. I mean, I'm sure we're going to get to it. We're obviously going to get to it later, but this is partly why I love Gestalt so much, because it's and the sort of paradoxical theory of change is, in order to become something different, you have to become fully yourself. And when I heard that, I just thought, oh my goodness, this stuff is for me. I find liberating.
Right, and become fully yourself. And some people are, not so welcoming of the idea that also includes intersectional pieces of our identity, and recognizing those and naming those, and saying like, yes, I am this. Yes, this is my background. This is how I look. And this is, where I fit in these social structures and those privileges and those things. It's very interesting to hear your South African perspective on this, because a lot of this discourse I've only read and heard from the US-centric Black-white perspective. Very different.
That's a very it's also a point that's quite close to my heart, because I often look like I could be from the US or from the UK. I look like, well, I'm of European heritage, and I'm Caucasian. So I look like whites elsewhere.
You can just walk through the airport. It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I'm different. And that is very interesting, because it's easy for me to name those things, because, I am the picture of privilege at the moment. And yet I'm always challenged and triggered by, do I have the right to be more? And I believe I do. And I like to say that, and I like to talk. I mean, my friends and colleagues know that if they give me the mic, it's difficult to get it away from me. And sometimes it's not time, it's not the time for people like me to speak, but I get really energized to speak. I care deeply.
that's fair, and I can identify with a lot of things that you're saying. As an Anglo-Canadian immigrant to Mexico, there is more
Yes.
in my identity and my way of being and my position in the world than is just showing up on this. But also, I do not, I am not, I cannot possibly fully represent or speak for a whole other group of people.
Mm.
So
Mm.
interesting. One thing that I have not heard you mention so far, another aspect of your identity, I am curious how you live or experience or have come to understand yourself as a man or within your masculinity or however you define that.
Yeah, it's very much in my story. And in some ways, it's an interesting part of disclosure, I suppose. And, I'm not sure if I want to, well, I'll talk about it. But I might ask for an edit on this
Mhm.
because of the kind of the way in which the world is at the moment. But a lot of my grappling with identity relates to the realization, I think, from as early as I can remember, is that I'm gay, and it was a real fight internally to get to a comfort with it. I always thought I would be, like a priest with a happy family, children. That was the kind of that felt like what my path was. And at the time I was growing up, it's not like the time of now, and it was a real battle for me, and making peace with that and realizing that this is part of me and it is me, and there's nothing to be ashamed of, and that who I am is whole, no matter what particular narrow-minded religion or political persuasion, no matter what those things say, which I'm very sensitive to because I crave to fit in, that sometimes you've got to stand up and say, this is who I am. It's not for you to take or leave, but it's for me to be. And to be able to stand in that confidence has been a big thing for me. And that, I think, has also got a lot to do with about how I would project onto others, because I was looking for somewhere else to be besides me. And, I've come right home to me. And I'm aware that disclosures like this can be provocative for some and dangerous for me in certain contexts. So I disclose with caution, but not with shame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So that's had a lot to do with
there's just this
how,
little sadness when I hear you, make such a clear, confident statement of self, and then wonder if it's safe and wonder if you're going to have to edit that out. That's
yeah, yeah. And I think, I mean, Heather, you absolutely, there's a sadness to it. I think there's a sadness and a sensitivity to my being, which is as a consequence of that. I mean, I am who I am because of where I've been.
Mhm.
So, and it's precisely those tensions, I think, which make a human interesting. So, like, I've had to work about taking a seat at the table,
Mhm.
not being grateful to serve at the table, to say, I'll sit here and
Mhm.
I can speak with confidence. And this is where I come from. This is who I am. This is what you think people like me should be like. And unfortunately, I'm not.
Mm.
I remain
Fortunately,
totally me.
fortunately.
Yeah. But this is the thing. I really battle with stereotypes and projections onto me of what I should be. Ooh, I even find myself nervous to come out to young people because I'm not gay enough. I'm not the right kind of this or the right kind of that. I don't, I've got this, I'm a complex being, and I don't like it. I can't stand it when people tell me, "Oh, you should be that," or "Oh, you are that because of that." So, that's been it's been a really big part of my, becoming who I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with subtleties, it sounds like.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, lots of subtleties,
Mm-hmm.
lots of distinctives,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
I'm constantly. This is another reason why I love the paradoxical theory of change. I'm constantly startled at how accepting people are, because my whole belief system was I am going to be rejected because, and then when I show up authentically and aligned with what I say about the way the world should be, like this is who I am, and I can, I can sit and stand in that. People seem to find that absolutely fine.
I love that you're startled
But
by
when
that.
I
It's like,
approach,
surprise! Yes, it's a lot easier to be authentic.
yes, but it's hard sometimes. Well, I found the journey a really hard one, to be able to feel whole enough to stand in front of someone who might have very different views and
Mm-hmm.
might have views about people like me. They say, I don't like you. Just by looking at you already, I don't like you. And then to realize that actually that position is not static. That's an invitation
Mm-hmm.
to see if you can make them curious, to see it another way. Because I don't think that uh, that you can look at someone and say, that's who you are. I mean, what
No.
you see is what you get, but you get a lot more if you can see a little more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another lovely thing about Gestalt, is the multiple realities, that stance of there are multiple realities. And can we get curious? I find liberating.
Yeah,
Because
that
curiosity
curiosity
is
with a
just
little bit of
the thing.
challenge and a little bit of frustration. It's a beautiful mix.
I like almost a syncopated curiosity. Like,
Mm-hmm.
kind of, it like tilts you into being like really opening your eyes and all your senses, saying, oh my goodness, here's an interesting person.
Mm-hmm.
Or, well, to me, people are always interesting, but I'm getting more interested because of something that's happened. I've seen something. I'm curious. Oh, why did they do that when they said that? What happened with their body language? What happened with their tone? What happened with their eyes? And I get so curious.
Mm-hmm. So before I do ask you the more gestalty questions, I am curious what your answer would be to the direct question of how do you experience power and privilege in your life?
Oh, I do. Um, I have, I'm, yes, I breathe in and sigh as I speak about this, because I am the picture of privilege and power, certainly in the Western world at the moment. I am the picture of privilege in my country. I grew up in a system until I was 23, where it technically moved. But until that age, the state's resources were directed heavily to invest in whites and men. And I am both. So I have been given a huge start materially in life. Even though I say I don't come from material intergenerational wealth in terms of property or money, but I come from intergenerational privilege in terms of access to networks and wealth. But our families didn't go that route, in the sense of, they were more spiritual or teaching or but I have no doubt I have huge power and privilege by virtue of fate.
Well,
And I
I
find it
you mentioned that it's
to
also by
carry.
virtue of policy, because some people don't have that clarity because they weren't there for a before and after moment of policy change, where privilege was
Oh,
systemically
yes.
awarded
So,
in such a
well, so
clear
that
way.
I say, yeah, exactly. I still benefit from that because the economic power in my country is largely held. I don't know what the latest statistics are, but are largely held by the minority. There's a complete imbalance in the demographics and the economic power in my country. So people like me are still likely to have far better indicators, socioeconomic indicators, likelihood of education, longevity, disease, money, all of those things skew towards me. I'm part of the group that fights it, but I've still got it, and this is a very interesting tension and dynamic, which invites constant reflection and humility. I get it so wrong so often. I'm clumsy. I try and keep a handle on it, but it's part of me. It's part of me. I'm aware of it, and I'm not always aware of it. Some of my most profound moments of sort of backpedaling have been when my presence has gone unchecked in an engagement in a work situation, where the way I've spoken and how I've spoken, not necessarily the words I've used, but everything else has just said, ugh, power, privilege, power, privilege, power, privilege. And I didn't see it. And having to backpedal and sort of come back and say, I'm sorry.
It's one of those words
been,
I've had to learn has been entitlement of, oh, oops. Yeah. It's that second thought that I did not know that I had to give sometimes before just,
Exactly.
Okay, thank you for that. And now, can we talk a little bit about your relationship with Gestalt? How did you two meet? What was that like?
I remember it very clearly. And I want to name, I think it's so important. I want to name the lineage of Gestalt for me. And ironically, the person that introduced me to Gestalt introduced me to a Gestalt way before I'd heard of the word. So I think the first person that intrigued me in their presence and the way they facilitated is John and Kum. 1996. I still remember, so clearly where the workshops were. I was delighted to be part of a project. And there was this Ghanaian facilitator who was doing things which I just thought, my goodness, this is amazing. This is what I want to do. This is what I want to be. I just, wow, this guy. And then, I didn't see him for years. And then I was working in the National Treasury before that, I came across Chantal Wiley and Jochen Lohmeyer. They were facilitating as well. And also, I was intrigued by their presence and their style. And sort of I like this. And then like about 10 years later, I was working in the National Treasury, and my boss at the time, Eileen Meyer, had employed Chantal and had been speaking with Jochen, and Gestalt was being introduced into the unit I worked in, which was an internal OD kind of unit. And Eileen gave me Edwin Nevis's book, Organizational Consulting. And she said, I think you'll be interested to read this. And it's not an easy book to read, but I read it with delight. And I went back to it and I said, oh my goodness, this book has written things that just make so much sense to me, intuitively. This just makes perfect sense. And then it started with Chantal would run these intro to Gestalt courses and other courses. This is Chantal Wiley, and then she introduced me to, she said, why not come on? It was then IOSD, Marianne and John O'Hanifin. So I have to mention the profound influence of, so, if I talk about the four people who I revere in my Gestalt journey: John and Kumstel Wiley, Marianne Rainey, John O'Hanifin. And I've just read Marianne and Jono's book, Leading in the Age of Not Knowing. And I've felt very moved and emotional about these extraordinary, the lineage of Gestalt that I draw from. So I did the IOSD program. It was the last IOSD. And I just lapped it up. I loved every moment of it. The sophistication of the design, the embodiment of the concept by the faculty. It was totally transformative. It's almost like, I talk about my life as like BG and DG, like before Gestalt and during Gestalt, or like, so I think the IOSD program really was a pivoting point for me. And I realized
this is an
no,
ongoing
there's no after. You before and then it's during. Yeah, it's almost like an invitation to be, gestalted. I mean, that's why it's such a strange word, because in some ways it's an embodiment of a way of being which is different to before. And that's why it's difficult to explain verbally, because embodiment is not a verbal thing. It's a stance and a presence, which is either there or not. That got me, the lights came on for me. And then I had the delight of serving on the faculty for what became the iGold program. And I recently met Dorothy Simonovich, Gita Dost, Zeynep, and other colleagues from the Gestalt Center for Coaching in Istanbul and Toronto. So I also want to name Dorothy in particular as being another big person in my Gestalt lineage, even though I've only met Dorothy a few years ago, 2 years ago, maybe. But these are people who just intrigue me, the way in which they go to the boundary and are constantly reforging, I think, themselves as they grow with the world as it changes. So that's how I met Gestalt.
And what do you do with it? What is the essence of your practice and living and doing?
So I studied city and regional planning, which is amazing. And it just very soon, I just thought, well, what on earth am I doing these plans? Because they just don't get implemented like you think. And then people get involved and the dynamic is very different to the paper. And I got interested in the dynamic of the people. And I increasingly shifted into facilitation and strategy work and team development and coaching. And so that's the kind of where my career has gone explicitly since Gestalt. I think after that I realized I'm not that interested in the technical anymore. I'm interested in the relational. And I'm interested in where the strategic and the relational intersect. So when I left Treasury, I established a company with my business partner and former colleague at Treasury, Michael Henderson. And we called it Distillery because we wanted to get to the essence of things. And we're both Gestaltists. So it infuses our work. And we have associates that we work with who are Gestaltists. And we love working with them. It's just like when you work with the Gestaltist, it's completely different to when you don't. And I constantly get reminded when I don't, how much I enjoy working with Gestaltists, because there's a language that's intuitive and a way of being and a way of approaching, which is just so respectful of what is and therefore what can be. So I use Gestalt in everything I do. I use it in my family. I use it in my relationships. I'm constantly, it's the toolkit of life for me. And what a few of us have done recently, last year, was to launch a platform called Gestalt Africa, which has been an extraordinary thing. It's still new, but a few of us got together and said we want to create a platform for practitioners who are from the continent of Africa, or who identify or are sensitive to, or from the diaspora, or who find themselves curious and intrigued by the ground of Africa and what it evokes and provokes in our own growth towards becoming whole as humans. So this continent is full of polarities, contradictions, evocations, provocations, and it invites us to go to the boundary and grow. So we said, let's create a platform to allow practitioners to offer teaching, to build community, to assist practitioners on their own growth. And so this is what we've done. And here we are. I love the concept of a platform, because we want it for us. It's almost an act of love to say we will create the platform and let's distribute it for us, and not build an empire.
Yes, it is not an institute. It is not an organization. It is not a regulatory body.
Yeah, well, I mean, and all those things come up because you think, well, are we going to try that? Are we going to try that? And we constantly go one direction and pull back. And one of the team said a beautiful thing. The other day in a meeting is, let's become what we need to be, not what we want to be. And I just love that. I thought, yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. Let's dance with the context and see what comes. So that's been a real, it's been an act of leadership. Like, let's do it, and we've done it.
That's wonderful. I've been following that project without inserting myself into it in any way, but there are a lot of parallels.
Yeah.
The project that I'm started 13 years ago here in Mexico is Gestalt Mexico. And we've come up on an anniversary this year, and we're just sending out a massive survey saying, what do we want this to be? What does this need to be?
Yeah.
Rather than imposing it and giving it structure before.
And I mean, Heather, I find this thing so interesting, is that the stance of the Gestalt practitioner is to practice Gestalt. I mean, it's so obvious, but when you're practicing it, it allows you to dance with what is. And when you're not, and opposing the ego or your own stuff, or a frame that you thought it should be like this, that's where I always trip myself up.
Well, and any of those, traditional colonial knowledge structures of someone standing up and saying, I know, or I think, or I will, any kind of imposition, it has to be a we. There has to be, it has to be relational. There is no such thing.
And this is what's interesting for us in Gestalt Africa, is as we explore many of this has been a big kind of area that we've been immersing ourselves in, is that many of the Gestalt concepts are intrinsically African. Holism, connection, community, relationship, all the, and they find parallels, and there's different ways. So we often talk about, we're wanting to offer the African distinctive of Gestalt, which is, it just has a flavor, but the universal principles are beyond the words. But I'd
Hmm.
love to hear more about Gestalt Mexico. I mean, and don't
Well,
you
so would
love the way?
I'm certainly not the one to define it. I mean, look at me.
No, no,
But
but I mean, I don't know about it. So I mean, as soon as you put the word Gestalt next to some geography, the
mhm.
invitation is to say, "Oh, what is the Gestalt of Mexico?"
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Oh, well, yeah. I think these are interesting conversations to have going forward.
Mm.
But I am also curious how you might say now, I know it's complex, but how would you say that Gestalt has affected you as a person?
Ah, yeah, I think I've spoken about it earlier, but this whole concept of holism and the whole is different to the sum of the parts. I found that a really useful way of putting myself together, and that the parts of me make the whole of me, and those parts need attention. And the parts of me are different to the whole of me. So I love that as a kind of framing for being a human. Um, the paradoxical theory of change I've mentioned earlier is just, I think that's true liberation. Get to know yourself, get in touch with your stuff, look at it for what it is, look at yourself for who you are in that moment. Be curious, be strong enough to be curious with soft and sharp eyes at yourself. And then so much becomes possible. So paradoxical theory is totally amazing. I just think concepts like, unit of work is so obvious. In fact, it's almost hard to teach because it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's profound. And things like the cycle of experience. When you pay attention to completing cycles, I think about closure and how amazing good closure is and what it does to humans and
Well,
groups.
I'm smiling because you don't always get the closure, and the paradoxical theory on top of the contact cycle is just, and this is where you are.
Well, exactly. And bracketing, the power
Mhm,
of sometimes you've got to bracket.
mhm,
But being able to name that it's not closed already gives you that paradoxical closure.
mhm,
Saying it should be closed keeps it open.
mhm.
Um, so I can't even remember what your question was, but I'm talking about the things of
Just how it
Gestalt I love.
affected you as a
Was
person.
that it?
Yeah, no, I mean I'm hearing that it holds you, it frames,
Ah,
it gives language. I mean, these are my interpretations.
sorry, my connection broke for a moment there. Heather, can you just repeat
Yep,
what you said?
yep, your video is frozen. I might wait for
Okay,
you to re.
okay, it'll come back. Let's
Yep,
just. Oh, there we go. It should be back now.
there we go. There's a bit of a lag.
Am I back?
Yeah, the question was just, how Gestalt has affected you as a person. And I'm
Oh,
saying that my interpretation from what you say is that in some way it's given language and has given
yes.
structure and resonance.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It has given structure and resonance. It's given me grounding.
Hmm.
I just think I find the concept intuitively very accessible.
Hmm.
Like figure and ground. Uh, the cycle goes, and you go into that sort of void, and you know, it, it seems for me it has distilled a lot of complexity into forms and frames which I can identify with, that kind of condense so
Hmm.
much into what intuitively feels makes sense, just makes sense
Hmm.
to me.
Hmm. Yeah, I talk often about sort of the phenomenology of the obvious, and
Yeah.
it's that recognizing very clear fundamental patterns in the field that
Mm.
may not be obvious until they're articulated.
Yeah.
And once they're
Yeah.
articulated, it's like, oh, well, of course, they're right there.
Yes. Yeah. When you see it, you can't unsee it, but until you see it, you can't.
But it's always been there and it's
Um,
completely
it's
obvious
always
now
been
that
exactly.
someone mentions it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Blinding flashes of the obvious.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm also curious, you named this need for belonging and sort of your inside outside experience. And I just kept seeing like the Mobius strip where the inside is the
Hmm.
outside as you were talking about that. But I'm curious whether you feel part of a Gestalt community. And I mean, on
Hmm.
one level, I'm hearing yes in the project and Gestalt Africa. What about the rest of the Gestalt world?
Hmm. Um, I just want to check, is my connection better, or should I try and change networks?
If you have the chance to change networks, that would probably be useful. You've got little red bars and it
Yeah.
says that your bandwidth is low.
Okay, let me see. Let's see what I can. Should we, we're just gonna let me see if I can change networks.
So, I mean, the question was how, whether you feel or how you feel you're part of a Gestalt community.
It's a great question because I've noticed with Gestalt, there's so I talk about my lineage. So I know that my lineage starts in Gestalt International Study, it's Gestalt International Study Center and the Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
Cleveland is big. So I know that I'm from that camp or that home of Gestalt, and I can, so John and Marianne come from there. John and Chantel trained there. Dorothy Simonovich was there. So I know that's my Gestalt sort of, and so I know I'm part of the iGold community. I'm part of Gestalt Africa, and I am part of Gestalt Center for Coaching. Those are the three I know and relate with people there. I am aware of things like relational organizational Gestalt. I look at the website, I get interested about that. John Leary Joyce, I often see his stuff and I think it's fantastic. I've read his book. I've got the relational organizational Gestalt book. I hear about the European Gestalt Association, whatever, Intagio, I know about. And then there's lots of these Gestalt sort of institutes or organizations or people, and there's different ways in which they organize themselves. And I think there's quite a lot of, I'm curious as to, I mean, the question makes me think because I'm part of, I'm not in the whole of, if that makes sense. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious, I'm keen to explore. I want to try out some of the courses from these different groupings. I think that's a way to get in and get to know them and understand what they offer. But I don't, I'm only involved in those iGold, Gestalt Africa, and Gestalt Center for Coaching.
That's
And there's
interesting. I
a
mean,
whole world out there.
there is, and I think it's always beautiful the way that language and geography create these silos or bubbles or parallel channels.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and personally, my inclination, I also like the connecting and the bridge building. When you said, take some courses, I think that sounds lovely, but I would much, much more love to be in a space where there was sort of co-learning rather than
Yes.
going to learn from. And
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yeah.
idea that you would have to drop into Europe and then learn from,
Yeah.
the top down as if you didn't bring in a whole world that they have no idea exists
Yeah.
in, they generalizing, but it's, yeah, that's a whole opinion piece.
Well,
I'll write that later.
no, I mean, I really like what you're saying because I think, the whole, I mean, it's like practice what we preach, Um,
Yeah, I mean, but the way that knowledge holding is controlled and regulated and the power games around that
yeah.
are very colonial, very, teach the ignorant savages when someone is coming from outside that power holding structure, as if they did not, as if we did not come in with a full set of knowledge.
That's also why I like the concept of a platform.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but yeah, so that's my answer.
Sorry, yeah, I'm just speaking over your answer. But yeah, so
No, I
I'm
mean, and
curious.
you know,
Mhm.
but let me say another thing here. I mean, what part of the reason is why, you know, so you reached out, I think, to Jochen for some names, and he shared a whole lot of names, one of which was mine. And I thought, I'm very interested in this project of yours, or this project. And the best way to get to know it is to say, yes, I'm up for an interview, because that's the way I can make a connection with you. And then who knows what will happen, because Gestalt Mexico, I'm interested, you know. And what's your Gestalt, you know, constellation?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of that, there's so much there. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I suppose one thing that I'm really interested in is Gestalt. That's partly why, I mean, it's funny. I thought that Dorothy Simonovich was Turkish. I should have known with the name, but I projected this kind of Turkish thing on her, and she loves Turkey. And I wanted to go to a center that was not in Europe or the US. And I thought, you know, Istanbul is just so interesting from a Gestalt point of view, because, you know, the Bosphorus separates Europe and Asia. So I said, well, this is the kind of place I want to be, and I want to meet other Gestaltists. And I got introduced to all these wonderful, the Turkish community of Gestalt practitioners. It was totally amazing. And so when, you know, like something like Mexico really interests me, because it feels more familiar to my context. You know, the poles pull hard apart, and the kind of virtue signaling is a little less intense, coming from our sort of, you know, these countries of ours that are dealing with the reality of the global inequality right here, not over there,
Yes.
not through a passport.
Yeah. Not from a resort. Yeah.
No.
Interesting. So what challenges have you faced in these Gestalt processes? What have you run up against, or walls have you hit? Because otherwise, I mean, it just sounds like a wonderful flowing commercial of "it's wonderful, come on in." I mean, that's great. And
well, I don't think there are walls. I mean, I haven't hit any walls. I have taken, it's like, I suppose the frustration is how long it can take for contact to happen, for the aha, for it to sink. That the comfort that I can learn it, I'll hit a wall then when I think I've got it, because it's not about getting it. This is what I keep feeling. Oh my goodness, it's the stance, it's not the knowledge. I keep it. So I suppose that was the first thing, was that, oh, I've got a handle on this. Yeah, so I suppose I trip myself up when I think I'm getting it, and then I delight myself when I feel I've got it. If that makes sense. It's kind of, it clicks in. It's almost like a intellectual sort of chiropractor that kind of just, you know, when once it's clicked in, it's back, it's in, and then when it's out, and you can't tell it to go in. You know, you got to work with it. So I think it's the iterative nature. It's an invitation in to a constant exploration and dynamic with these paradoxes, polarities. I suppose the real thing is that you can't teach it without being it. And that's the thing that's really hard, is when I hit a wall, generally it's because I'm not doing what I'm saying, or the very thing that I think someone else should be doing is the thing that I'm not doing. So yeah, I mean, my real response is I don't feel I've hit walls, but I've certainly been confronted with dilemmas where I've got no answer. And I have to stand in that insecurity, not knowing what the answer is, which is the knowing of the stance that hold on, stay there.
Mm-hmm.
You can't see what's there yet, but it's coming. And keep all your antennae super alert, because something is still forming here for you. And I suppose that's, I like things to be resolved. I like to fix things. I want to bridge things. And sometimes I've learned, maybe that's one of the big things, is it's not there to be fixed. And you can't, and it's not for you. And it is that way. And get rid of your need to fix this, because you're keeping it broken by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are probably the hardest things. It's, that sort of, it's the realization that things are, as opposed to the hope that things will be. That's the dance, I think, which is the really hard part, and I think the real value for me as a person, because I come from a real normative position of I'm an activist, a social justice person. I've always been on the right side of things. And then once an incredible facilitator said to me, have you ever considered yourself part of the problem? And I was startled by the question, because I honestly never had. And this is like 5 years ago, 7 years ago, that question came. I found it a total liberation. I thought, honestly, I hadn't. I've always said that I'm on the right side. We're doing the right things. We're making the world a better place.
Damn it, I'm a radicalized polarity. No.
Yeah. No, exactly. So yeah, I think that's been the real. I would say, the Gestalt journey is. It's not one of these. There's no algorithm for it, and it's, the frames are codified, but that you're not going to get it. It doesn't come through here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you see figures through here, but it doesn't. It's the elusive nature of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's always more.
Well, I think just that word algorithm just caught my attention there, because it's almost like the algorithm of the experiment. Maybe AI will do Gestalt better than we do because we aren't personally invested in seeing the pattern and just making the suggestion of, hey, have you considered, would you maybe like to try, the way that social media suggests videos? Just based on what is.
It's really interesting, because all those things are based on the pattern recognition powers of the machine,
Mm-hmm.
which is what we talk about in Gestalt.
Mm-hmm.
And what are you seeing? What are you not seeing? Why are you seeing what you see? And yet I still think that for us in the age of AI, the presence of AI, I think, can only ever, well, at this stage, who knows? It's two-dimensional at best. And when we bring our presence in, we get, the full 3D of a unique human being,
Mm-hmm.
with awareness of themselves, and presence goes into a fourth dimension, which is use of self with presence. That's when you can really do the transformative work. I don't know where AI is going to get that intelligence from.
I don't know.
Maybe
I'm not voting for it. I'm not rooting for it.
No.
I'm just.
Yeah, I know exactly. I mean, we have to. Yeah, we don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
I love some of the formulas of Gestalt. Like, well, is it the field theory? Behavior is a function of person and environment, and then there's a presence. It's got a formula. I love those sorts of things, but
Living them and being them is a little bit more complex.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, is there anything at this point that you feel you would like to add? Or do you think that the relevant, salient parts of yourself have come into this space already today?
I would just say I really enjoyed the discussion. I think there's always more, but I enjoyed the discussion. I enjoyed the reflection on what this journey means for me, and I really appreciate the universal nature of the stance of a Gestalt practitioner. It feels intuitively right for me to pursue that way of being in the world. And I'm really grateful for how serendipity kind of, how my path intersected with Gestalt, and now I'm in the current of Gestalt, enjoying the flow and sometimes despairing at the world at the same time.
You can do both. It's okay. All right. Well, thank you. It was really a joy to meet you this morning, my morning, and I appreciate your time. Is it okay if we leave it here?
Yes. Thank you so much, Heather. It's been a very energizing discussion. Thank you.